The moment Connor Hayes knew he'd lost Elara wasn't when her bones began to crack and reform, nor when white fur erupted across her once smooth skin. It wasn't even when her gentle brown eyes transformed into predatory amber orbs that glowed in the sterile light of the laboratory. No, he lost her the moment she looked at him with those alien eyes and still whispered his name. Because in that single word, Connor, spoken through elongated canines with a voice that was both hers and not hers, he realized the true horror. Elara was still in there, aware, conscious, trapped within the monster she was becoming, and that made what he had to do impossible. "Step away from the specimen, Dr. Hayes." Director Chambers' voice crackled through the intercom, cold and clinical. "Security teams are en route. The Artemis protocol has been initiated." Connor knew what that meant. Total containment. No witnesses, no evidence. They would eliminate everyone in the lunar research station who had seen what Elara had become. He held his ground, standing mere inches from Elara's transformed face. Her hot breath misted in the artificially cooled air of the lab. The scent of copper, blood hung between them from the wounds on her shoulder, where the transformation had torn through skin. "She's still in there," he said, not taking his eyes off hers. "She recognizes me." "That's the problem, Doctor," Chambers replied. "The directive was for a weapon, not a pet. Step away now." The low growl that vibrated from Elara's chest wasn't directed at Connor, but at the cameras mounted in the corners of the lab. Her heightened senses had picked up Chambers' voice, and something primal in her new biology had registered the threat. "Run!" she managed, the word distorted through her transformed vocal cords. Instead, Connor reached out slowly and placed his palm against her furred cheek. It was softer than he expected. "Not without you," he whispered. Behind them, the lab's security doors began their lockdown sequence with a pneumatic hiss. The hunt had begun. 14 days earlier. "You're staring again," Elara said without looking up from her microscope. Connor blinked, caught. "Am I that obvious?" "You're that consistent." Now she did look up, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear as she smiled. The movement caught the light on her engagement ring, sending prismatic patterns dancing across the lab's white walls. "Same time every day. 2:17 p.m. Lunar Standard Time. You take a coffee break and watch me work instead of drinking it." "I'm admiring scientific precision in action," he defended with a grin. "You're procrastinating on your nucleotide sequencing," she countered, nodding toward his neglected workstation. He couldn't deny it. The anomalous DNA samples extracted from the meteorite fragment, dubbed the relic by the research team, had proven exceptionally difficult to analyze. After 3 months on the Artemis Lunar Research Station, they were no closer to understanding the origin of the organic material found embedded in a meteorite estimated to be over 200 million years old. Connor moved to Elara's side, peering over her shoulder at the cellular structures displayed on her monitor. "Any luck with the cellular response tests?" "Nothing conclusive," she sighed. "The cells are definitely alive, but dormant. They don't react to any known stimulus." She leaned back, unconsciously resting against his chest. "Yet they're somehow preserving themselves without apparent energy consumption. It defies everything we know about biology." "Sonia, maybe we're thinking too terrestrially," Connor suggested, absently running his thumb along her shoulder. "These cells survived a meteor impact and 200 million years buried in lunar regolith. Whatever they are, they evolved in an environment nothing like Earth." Elara turned to face him, excitement sparking in her eyes. "What if we stop trying to make them respond to Earth-based stimuli? What if—" The lab door slid open with a soft hiss, interrupting her thought. Dr. Abernathy, the station's aging research director, entered with a digital clipboard in hand and his perpetual scowl firmly in place. "Hayes, Winters," he acknowledged curtly. "The Milton Group representatives are arriving tomorrow. I need your preliminary findings report by 0800. Connor straightened. "Tomorrow? They weren't scheduled until next month." "Plans change when you're funding a $3 billion lunar research station," Abernathy replied dryly. "Apparently our last transmission about cellular preservation properties caught their attention." Elara frowned. "We're nowhere near ready for a presentation. We've barely scratched the surface of understanding these cells. Which is why you'll both be working through the night, Abernathy said with finality. The Milton Group doesn't make unscheduled visits to the moon for disappointing news. He turned to leave, then paused. And remember, this is a private, corporate research station. Our findings belong to Milton. Keep the speculation in your report to a minimum. After the door closed behind him, Elara let out a long breath. I don't trust them. Milton Biotech has too many defense contracts. We knew that when we signed on, Connor reminded her gently. For the chance to study extraterrestrial biology? Yes. She gestured to the microscopic image still displayed on her screen. But this is bigger than we thought. These cells, they're not just preserved. I think they're waiting. Connor raised an eyebrow. Waiting for what? Her expression was troubled as she turned back to the microscope. That's what scares me. The Milton Group representatives arrived with the efficiency and presence of an invading force. 3 identical black shuttles descended on the landing pad, disgorging a dozen security personnel in tactical gear before the actual executives emerged. Connor and Elara watched from the observation deck as Director Catherine Chambers stepped onto lunar soil for the first time, not bothering with the traditional moment of reflection that most visitors took. Even from a distance, her sharp features and silver-white hair conveyed authority. She doesn't look like a science director, Elara murmured. That's because she's not, came Abernathy's voice from behind them. Catherine Chambers heads Milton's Special Projects Division. Military applications, primarily, Connor turned. You didn't mention we'd be presenting to military contractors. Abernathy's expression remained carefully neutral. As I said, plans change. Now come along. We don't keep Director Chambers waiting. The presentation room had been transformed from its usual utilitarian setup. The standard aluminum tables now bore black cloths with the Milton Group's red insignia. The lighting had been dimmed everywhere except the presentation area, creating the impression of a stage rather than a scientific forum. Eliza was struck by how few scientists appeared to be among the Milton contingent. Besides Chambers, there were just 2 others who might pass for researchers. A nervous-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses and a stone-faced woman who kept her eyes fixed on her tablet. The rest were clearly security or military, standing at ease around the room's perimeter with earpieces and the subtle bulge of concealed weapons. This isn't right, Elara whispered to Connor as they took their places. They're treating this like a classified weapons briefing. Before he could respond, Director Chambers stepped forward. Up close, she was even more intimidating. Tall and lean, with eyes so pale blue they appeared almost colorless. Dr. Hayes, Dr. Winters, she nodded to each of them. Your work has become of special interest to the Milton Group. Please begin your presentation. For the next 30 minutes, Connor and Elara alternated explaining their findings on the extraterrestrial cellular material. They detailed its remarkable preservation properties, its resilience against radiation, and its unusual molecular structure. They deliberately avoided speculating on potential applications, focusing instead on the scientific significance of discovering cellular life that evolved outside Earth's biosphere. Throughout the presentation, Chambers remained impassive, asking no questions. It was only when they concluded that she finally spoke. These cells, she said, tapping a manicured finger against the displayed electron microscope image. You mentioned they appear dormant. Have you attempted to, shall we say, wake them? Connor exchanged a glance with Elara. We've exposed samples to various stimuli, yes, but there's been no significant response. I see. Chambers turned to the nervous man with glasses. Dr. Patel, your assessment? Patel cleared his throat. The cellular structure suggests a highly adaptive organism. The dormancy is likely a survival mechanism triggered by extreme conditions. I believe Earth-normal conditions, particularly radiation levels and atmospheric composition, might be insufficient to trigger activation. What about human tissue? Chambers asked. The room went silent. I'm sorry, Elara said, unable to keep the shock from her voice. Have you tested the cell's interaction with human tissue samples? Chambers clarified, as casually as if asking about the weather. Connor stepped forward. That would violate at least 6 research protocols. We have no idea how these cells might interact with terrestrial biology, which is precisely why we need to find out, Chambers replied coolly. The Milton Group didn't build this station for academic publications, Doctor. We're interested in practical applications. You mean weapons, Elara said flatly. Chambers smiled for the first time, a thin, bloodless expression. I mean survival, Dr. Winters. Humanity's survival. These cells have properties that could revolutionize medicine, space exploration, and yes, defense. She turned to Abernathy. Prepare Laboratory 7 for the new testing protocols. Dr. Patel will oversee the transition. Abernathy nodded, avoiding eye contact with Connor and Elara. Director, Connor protested, we need more baseline data before attempting any cross-species cellular interaction. The risks have been calculated and deemed acceptable. Chambers cut him off. Your concerns are noted, Dr. Hayes. You and Dr. Winters will continue your excellent work under Dr. Patel's expanded protocols. Her tone made it clear the discussion was over. As the Milton team filed out, Elara gripped Connor's arm with white-knuckled intensity. They're going to weaponize it, she whispered. Whatever this is, they're going to turn it into something terrible. Connor placed his hand over hers, feeling the cool metal of her engagement ring against his palm. Not if we find the truth first, he promised. Neither of them realized the truth would come hunting for them instead. During the next week, the Artemis research station transformed. Laboratory 7, once a storage area, became a high-security zone with restricted access and constant surveillance. Additional Milton personnel arrived daily, most of them security forces with military bearing. Connor and Elara found themselves increasingly isolated from the new research protocols. They were permitted to continue their baseline studies of the extraterrestrial cells, but all their findings had to be submitted directly to Dr. Patel, with no copies retained. They're keeping us busy with meaningless tasks, Elara fumed as they lay in their tiny shared quarters one night. The living space was barely large enough for a bed and small desk, but it was the only place they could speak freely. Patel's team is doing the real work behind those new security doors. Connor stared at the ceiling, tracing the faint seam where the prefabricated panels joined. I managed to access some of their requisition orders today, he said quietly. They brought in mammalian tissue samples, lots of them, and gene sequencing equipment that's far beyond what we have. Elara propped herself up on one elbow. They're not just studying the cells. They're trying to integrate them with Earth biology. It gets worse. Connor turned to face her, his expression grave. I saw your name on a medical requisition form. They've ordered your complete genetic profile and medical history from Earth. What? Why? I don't know. But only yours, not mine or anyone else's. Elara was silent for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Connor, I need to get into Lab 7. I need to know what they're doing with my data. It's too risky. The security is focused on keeping people out, not monitoring people already cleared for the main lab areas. She sat up, decision made. I can use Dr. Lynn's access card. She always leaves it in her lab coat, and she's exactly my height and build from a distance. Connor sat up beside her. Even if you get in, what then? What are you looking for? Answers, Elara said simply. Before they turn something we don't understand into something we'll regret. And the next night, Elara made her move. Connor created a minor diversion in the main laboratory, a carefully orchestrated equipment malfunction that required immediate attention from security and technical staff. While attention was diverted, Elara, wearing Dr. Lynn's lab coat and with her hairstyle similarly, approached Laboratory 7. The borrowed access card worked, the door sliding open with a soft pneumatic hiss. Inside, the laboratory was unlike any other on the station. The stark utilitarian design of the Artemis facility had been enhanced with cutting-edge equipment that hadn't even been on the manifest when they'd arrived from Earth. The center of the room was dominated by a sealed glass chamber containing what appeared to be a sophisticated incubation system. Inside, suspended in a clear nutrient medium, was a pulsing mass of tissue approximately the size of a human heart. But it wasn't human. The tissue had a faint bluish tinge and seemed to shift subtly even as she watched. as though constantly reforming itself at a cellular level. Surrounding the chamber were workstations displaying genetic sequences, cellular models, and simulation projections. Elara moved quickly to the nearest terminal, using Lynn's credentials to access the system. What she found turned her blood to ice. Project Lycanthrope. The files detailed Milton's true interest in the extraterrestrial cells. They weren't studying them for scientific discovery or even conventional weapons. They were attempting to create a biological enhancement system, a way to incorporate the alien cell's extraordinary adaptive capabilities into human genetic structure. They were trying to create super soldiers. The simulation showed human subjects with drastically enhanced strength, sensory perception, and regenerative abilities. But they also showed horrific failures, test subjects whose bodies rejected the alien cells, resulting in agonizing cellular breakdown. And there, in a restricted subfolder, Elara found her answer. Her own genetic profile, analyzed and highlighted as prime candidate, 99.7% compatibility. They hadn't brought her to the moon to study the alien cells. They had brought the alien cells to the moon to study her. A noise at the door made her heart skip. She quickly closed the files and moved toward the exit, trying to appear casual. But as she passed the incubation chamber, something unexpected happened. The alien tissue mass pulsed more rapidly, taking on a faint luminescence. It was responding to her presence. The door slid open. Dr. Patel stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. Elara, clearly not Dr. Lynn, standing beside the now actively pulsing specimen. "Dr. Winters," he said quietly, "I see you've met our progress." "What are you doing here, Patel?" she demanded, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Creating monsters for Milton's private army?" He stepped fully into the lab, allowing the door to close behind him. Creating the next step in human evolution, actually. His nervousness from the initial meeting was gone, replaced by the calm certainty of a true believer. "And you, Dr. Winters, are the key. Because of my genetic compatibility," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Precisely, the alien cells reject most human DNA, causing catastrophic mutation. But your genetic structure, something in your particular DNA sequencing, allows for perfect integration." He gestured to the pulsing mass. "It recognizes you even now. It wants to join with you." Elara took a step back. "You're insane. I'm not going to let you experiment on me." Patel smiled sadly. "I'm afraid Director Chambers has already made that decision. Your fiancé's diversion was rather obvious, you know. Security has already detained him." As if on cue, the laboratory door opened again. 2 armed guards entered, flanking Director Chambers. "Dr. Winters," Chambers said coolly, "how convenient that you volunteered yourself for Phase 2 ahead of schedule." "I haven't volunteered for anything," Elara replied, edging away until her back pressed against the cool glass of the incubation chamber. "Your presence here says otherwise." Chambers nodded to the guards. "Prepare her for the integration procedure." As the guards moved forward, Elara felt something strange, a vibration through the glass at her back, a sudden warmth. She glanced over her shoulder and gasped. The alien tissue had pressed itself against the glass directly behind her, pulsing in perfect rhythm with her racing heartbeat. And in that moment of distraction, the guards seized her arms. "Patarashariyin." Connor sat in a holding cell, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, where a security guard had struck him. His thoughts were consumed with Elara. Had she found what she was looking for? Had she escaped back to their quarters? Or had she, like him, been caught? The cell door slid open, revealing Director Chambers. "Dr. Hayes," she said, taking a seat on the bench opposite him. "You've put me in a difficult position." "Where is Elara?" he demanded. "Preparing for a procedure that will change human history," Chambers replied calmly. "Her genetic structure is uniquely compatible with our extraterrestrial specimen. She will become the prototype for humanity's next evolutionary leap." Connor lunged forward only to be restrained by the guard who had entered behind Chambers. "You can't do this. She hasn't consented to any procedure. Her employment contract with Milton includes provisions for experimental medical procedures when deemed necessary for research advancement," Chambers said dismissively. "All perfectly legal. It's not legal, it's monstrous, Connor spat. Whatever you're planning won't work. Those cells aren't just adaptive, they're intelligent in some way. They're waiting for something specific. Chambers raised an eyebrow. And how would you know that, Doctor? Hayes? Because they've been dormant for 200 million years, yet they're still viable. That's not random preservation. That's intentional, suspended animation. He leaned forward as far as the guard's grip would allow. They're not tools you can control. They have their own evolutionary agenda. An agenda that aligns perfectly with our needs, Chambers stood. The integration procedure begins in 1 hour. Doctor, Winters' genetic compatibility means she is likely to survive the process with her cognitive functions intact. Likely? Connor echoed in horror. Science requires risk, Doctor. But don't worry, you'll be reunited with whatever she becomes. Your genetic profile shows a 78% compatibility. Not ideal, but acceptable for the second phase of testing. As Chambers turned to leave, Connor called after her. You don't understand what you're doing. The lunar radiation, it's different from Earth's. It might trigger unforeseen reactions in the alien cells. She paused at the doorway. That possibility has been calculated and deemed an acceptable risk. The door slid shut, leaving Connor alone with his desperation. Elara woke strapped to a medical table in Laboratory 7. Her head throbbed and her mouth felt dry. After effects of the sedative they'd administered when she fought against the guards. The laboratory was dimly lit, with only the incubation chamber fully illuminated. The alien tissue mass now filled nearly the entire container, pulsing with a faint luminescence that cast eerie shadows across the room. Dr. Patel moved into her field of vision, already dressed in a surgical gown with a mask pulled down around his neck. You're awake. Good. I wanted you conscious for this. The integration process requires an active nervous system. Patel, Elara rasped, don't do this. You have to know this is wrong. He busied himself checking her vital signs on a monitor. What I know is that humanity faces extinction on multiple fronts. Climate collapse, pandemics, resource depletion. These extraterrestrial cells offer transcendence. Adaptation beyond anything evolution could achieve in millions of years. Or they could destroy us from within, she countered. You have no idea what their true nature is. That's why we need you, Elara. He used her first name with disturbing familiarity. Your compatible genetic structure will allow integration without losing cognitive function. You'll be aware, conscious, able to communicate what you're experiencing as you transform. His eyes shone with fanatical enthusiasm. You'll be the bridge between humanity and its future. The laboratory door opened and Director Chambers entered, followed by several technicians pushing equipment trolleys. Prepare for Phase 1 integration, Chambers ordered, not even glancing at Elara. Technicians moved with practiced efficiency, connecting monitoring equipment to Elara's body and positioning a mechanical arm above the incubation chamber. Please, Elara tried one last time, looking directly at Chambers. The risk isn't worth it. These cells could be a Trojan horse, something that seems beneficial, but carries hidden danger. Your concerns are noted, Doctor, Chambers replied without emotion. But the potential benefits outweigh speculative risks. The mechanical arm descended into the incubation chamber, extracting a small sample of the pulsing alien tissue. It hovered for a moment, then moved toward Elara. Integration site prepared, a technician announced, swabbing an area on Elara's upper arm. Proceed, Chambers ordered. The mechanical arm lowered, pressing the alien tissue against Elara's exposed skin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the tissue liquefied, absorbing into her skin like water into sand. Elara gasped as an intense burning sensation spread from the integration site. On the monitors, her vital signs spiked dramatically. Heart rate doubling, brain activity surging into patterns the equipment could barely track. Remarkable, Patel whispered, watching the readings. The cells are integrating with her system exponentially faster than in our simulations. Through waves of pain, Elara became aware of something else. A presence, a consciousness that wasn't her own, flowing through her neural pathways like liquid mercury. It carried impressions too alien to comprehend, yet somehow familiar, as though awakening dormant knowledge encoded in her very DNA. "She's experiencing neural integration," Patel reported excitedly. "Dr. Winters, can you describe what you're feeling?" Elara couldn't respond. The alien presence was expanding through her consciousness, not erasing her identity, but enhancing it, adding perceptions and awareness she had never imagined possible. She could feel the lunar regolith beneath the station, sense the solar radiation washing over the moon's surface, taste the recycled air with such precision that she could identify each individual chemical component. And she could feel the pull of the Earth, visible through the laboratory's small observation window, its blue-white presence triggering something deep within the alien cells, now flowing through her bloodstream. Home, origin, birthplace. The realization hit her with stunning clarity. These weren't alien cells from some distant star system. They had evolved on Earth, ancient Earth, hundreds of millions of years ago. They had been ejected into space during a cataclysmic impact, preserved in the cold vacuum until the lunar impact that had buried them beneath the regolith. Now, after 200 million years of dormancy, they had found their way back to terrestrial DNA, back to the evolutionary path they had been torn from, and they were hungry to reclaim their place. "Her transformation is accelerating," a technician reported with alarm. "Cellular restructuring occurring at the dermis layer." Elara felt it, her skin tingling, burning as the alien cells rewrote her genetic code. The restraints cut into her wrists as her body arched involuntarily against the pain. "Administer the stabilizing compound," Chambers ordered sharply. Patel hesitated. "It might interfere with the integration process." "Do it now," Chambers snapped. "We need her conscious and communicative." As a technician injected something into her IV line, Elara became aware of another presence. Not the alien consciousness, but something more immediate. A familiar scent cutting through the clinical smells of the laboratory. Connor. The security systems of the Artemis research station had been designed with external threats in mind. Meteoric impacts, radiation breaches, even the far-fetched scenario of hostile extraterrestrial contact. They were not designed to contain a desperate man with intimate knowledge of the station's architecture and emergency protocols. Connor's escape from the holding cell had been methodical. First, triggering a minor oxygen fluctuation alarm through the environmental control panel he had helped design. Then, when the guard entered to check on him, applying the hand-to-hand combat techniques that had been mandatory training for all lunar mission specialists. Now, moving through the station's maintenance conduits, he navigated toward Laboratory 7, guided by the station schematics memorized during his 3 months on Artemis. He emerged from an access panel near the laboratory's secondary entrance, the one designed for emergency evacuation. The keypad required administrator credentials, which he didn't have. But he did have something else. His knowledge of how Abernathy, creature of habit that he was, used the same password pattern for all secondary systems. The door slid open, revealing the horror taking place inside. Elara was strapped to a medical table, her body convulsing as something terrible happened to her skin. Patches of white fur emerging, bones visibly shifting beneath the surface. Surrounding her was a team of technicians and guards, all focused on the monitors displaying her rapidly changing vital signs. No one noticed Connor's entrance in the commotion. He moved quickly to an emergency equipment locker, extracting a compressed oxygen cylinder. With practiced movements, he adjusted its valve and threw it toward the center of the room. The resulting explosion wasn't large, but in the confined space of the laboratory, its effect was dramatic. Alarms blared, sprinklers activated, and personnel scattered in confusion. Connor used the chaos to reach Elara, quickly releasing her restraints. "Connor," she gasped, her voice distorted as her vocal cords began to transform. Her eyes had already changed, brown irises now glowing amber, pupils contracting to vertical slits in the bright emergency lighting. "I'm getting you out of here," he promised, helping her from the table. But as she stood, her transformation accelerated. White fur erupted across her skin in waves, her facial structure elongating into a lupine muzzle. The pain must have been excruciating, but she remained silent, only her labored breathing betraying her agony. "Stop them!" Chambers' voice cut through the chaos. Guards turned, weapons raised. Connor positioned himself between Elara and the threat, but she moved with inhuman speed, placing herself in front of him instead. A growl emanated from her transformed throat, a sound that froze everyone in place, triggering primal human fear responses hardwired by evolution. In that moment of hesitation, Connor pulled Elara toward the door. They escaped into the corridor, alarms still blaring around them. "Maintenance shaft," Connor directed, supporting her increasingly inhuman form. "It leads to the emergency airlocks." Elara moved with growing confidence as her transformation continued, her new body adapting to its capabilities with frightening speed. By the time they reached the maintenance access point, she was moving on digitigrade legs, her hands transformed into powerful clawed appendages. Once inside the narrow shaft, Connor sealed the access panel behind them, buying precious minutes as they navigated toward the emergency airlocks. "Elara," he said as they paused at a junction, "can you understand me? Are you still... you?" Her transformed face turned toward him, amber eyes glowing in the dim emergency lighting. For a terrifying moment, he saw no recognition there, only predatory assessment, alien and cold. Then she spoke, the words distorted but unmistakable through her transformed vocal structures. "Still me, but more." She raised a clawed hand at his face with surprising gentleness. "The cells, Earth origin, not alien, ancient Earth predators, evolved before mammals, ejected by asteroid impact." Connor's scientific mind raced with the implications. They've been dormant all this time, waiting to return to terrestrial DNA. She nodded, the movement unnaturally fluid with her new musculature. "They're adapting me, using lunar radiation as catalyst. Earth visible from moon, triggers, homing instinct." "They want to return to Earth," Connor realized, "using you as a vessel, Akin using humans, to reclaim evolutionary niche." Her transformed features contorted in what might have been pain or concentration. "Connor, they can't reach Earth. Too dangerous. No natural predators. Would overwhelm ecosystem." The sound of a metal grinding against metal echoed through the shaft, security cutting through the sealed access panel. "We need to move," Connor urged. "The emergency airlocks are just ahead." "Where can we go?" Elara growled. "Nowhere. On station is safe." Connor's expression hardened with resolve. "Not on the station, no." The surface of the moon was beautiful in its desolation. Harsh, unfiltered sunlight cast sharp shadows across the gray regolith, the distant Earth hanging like a blue jewel in the black void of space. Connor's moonwalk had not been part of his training, but necessity was a quick teacher. He moved awkwardly in his hastily donned EVA suit, helping guide Elara's transformed body across the lunar surface, toward the emergency secondary launch pad. Elara wore no suit. She didn't need one. Her transformed physiology had adapted instantaneously to the vacuum, her fur-covered skin forming a natural barrier against the harsh conditions. Her new respiratory system extracting oxygen directly from the sparse molecules present in the lunar exosphere. The ancient Earth predator cells had evolved for survival in the most extreme conditions imaginable. In the distance, alarms silently flashed around the main dome of the Artemis station. Security teams would be mobilizing, preparing to pursue them across the lunar surface. But they would need to suit up, follow protocols, precious minutes gained. The secondary launch pad housed a single emergency escape vehicle, a small, automated craft designed to return injured personnel to the orbital transfer station in case of medical emergencies. It could accommodate 2 passengers and minimal cargo. Connor reached the launch pad first, activating the external airlock with his emergency override code. The small craft's hatch opened obediently, exposing its cramped interior. Elara hesitated at the entrance, her transformed body too large for the human dimension space. "Can't fit," she growled in frustration. "We have to try," Connor insisted, already removing his helmet inside the vessel's pressurized environment. "It's our only way off the surface. Milton controls all other transport." With painful effort, Elara contorted her transformed body to squeeze through the hatch. Once inside, she filled nearly 2/3 of the available space, her white fur brushing against control panels and life support systems. Connor quickly initiated the launch sequence, hands flying over controls he had only used in simulations. The craft's AI requested verbal confirmation of emergency status. Medical emergency, Connor stated clearly. 2 passengers requiring immediate evacuation to orbital transfer station. Biometric signatures detected. 1 human, 1 unknown, the AI responded. Please confirm passenger manifest. Connor hesitated. The AI wouldn't accept an unknown passenger without override authorization, which he didn't have. Elara growled softly, then with visible concentration, forced her transformed vocal structures to approximate human speech patterns. Dr. Elara Winters, she said, each syllable a triumph of will over her new biology. Authorization Gamma 69 Delta. The AI paused, then voice pattern recognized with 67% confidence. Genetic signature detected. Proceeding with emergency launch protocol. The craft's engines hummed to life, the launch countdown beginning on the main display. Through the small viewport, Connor could see figures in EVA suits emerging from the main dome, moving rapidly across the lunar surface toward their position. They're coming, he warned. Elara turned her massive head to look, amber eyes narrowing at the approaching threat. Not fast enough. The countdown reached 0. The craft shuddered as its engines ignited, pushing against lunar gravity with steadily building force. As they rose from the surface, Connor caught a glimpse of Director Chambers among the EVA-suited figures, her helmet's reflective visor tilted upward to track their ascent. Even from a distance, her posture conveyed cold fury. We made it, Connor breathed as the Artemis station dwindled beneath them, the curvature of the lunar surface coming into view. Beside him, Elara made a sound that might have been laughter through her transformed vocal structure. Made it off Moon, she corrected, still trapped between worlds. Connor turned to her, really looking at what she had become for the first time since their escape began. Her transformed body was magnificent in its alien beauty, a perfect fusion of ancient predator and human intelligence. White fur covered her entirely now, her face restructured into a lupine muzzle with powerful jaws. Only her eyes retained some hint of humanity, amber instead of brown, but still unmistakably Elara's in their expression. Are you in pain? He asked softly. She shook her massive head. No pain now. Adaptation. Complete. Her clawed hand reached for his, careful not to pierce his skin. But incomplete too. The cells still changing me, inside. Can it be reversed? The scientist in him couldn't help asking, even as he feared the answer. Don't know, she admitted, but can't stay like this. Too dangerous. She gestured to the blue planet growing slowly larger in the viewport. On Earth would be unstoppable predator. No natural enemies, and the cell want to spread. Connor understood the implication. If the ancient predator cells reached Earth's biosphere, they would do what they had evolved to do: propagate, adapt, conquer. The ecosystem would have no defense against an apex predator from 200 million years in the past. The orbital transfer station, Connor said, thinking rapidly. We can't go to Earth, but we need to get you somewhere safe to figure this out. Elara's transformed features contorted in what might have been a grimace. No safe place for what I've become. The craft's navigation system chimed, indicating their approach to the orbital transfer station, a sprawling structure of interconnected modules that served as the gateway between Earth and the lunar surface. From there, larger vessels made the 3-day journey back to Earth. Milton has personnel on the station, Connor said, checking the craft's communication system. They'll be waiting for us. As if to confirm his fears, the comm system activated. Emergency medical shuttle. This is orbital transfer control. Prepare to dock at Quarantine Base 6. Security team standing by to assist. Connor silenced the transmission. They know. Elara growled, the sound reverberating in the small cabin. Need alternative. Can't let them recapture us. Connor stared out at the slowly rotating station, mind racing through limited options. Then his gaze fixed on something beyond the station, a sleek corporate vessel preparing to depart from one of the outer docking arms. The Hermes, he breathed, private research vessel, non-Milton. The Hermes was well known in scientific circles, a state-of-the-art mobile laboratory owned by the Frontier Science Foundation, Milton's chief competitor in extraterrestrial research. It operated independently from Earth government oversight, conducting research in Earth orbit and cislunar space. Can reach it? Elara asked, hope flickering in her amber eyes. Connor took manual control of the small craft, disengaging from the automated docking trajectory. They're scheduled to depart for Earth orbit in 20 minutes. If we can reach them before then and explain the situation, they might help or fear me, like others. Her massive clawed hand gestured to her transformed body. Dr. Eleanor Tuma is their research director, Connor said, carefully maneuvering their craft away from the main approach vector. She's worked with experimental genetics. If anyone can understand your situation, it's her. As their small craft veered away from its programmed path, the comms system exploded with warnings and demands to return to course. Connor ignored them, focusing on the delicate task of navigating toward the outer docking arm where the Hermes waited. They've spotted us, he noted as a security craft launched from the station, moving to intercept. We won't reach the Hermes before they catch us. Elara's transformed features hardened with determination. Need distraction? She moved toward the craft's airlock. Open it. What? No! Connor grabbed her furred arm. Even with your adaptations, vacuum exposure is not lethal to this body, she interrupted. Trust me, the cells protect themselves. Their gazes locked, his human eyes wide with fear, her transformed eyes glowing with primal certainty. After a moment, he nodded reluctantly. What's your plan? Create chaos, she growled. Draw security away. You reach Hermes. Explain situation. Before he could argue further, she moved to the airlock controls, her clawed fingers surprisingly dexterous as they initiated the decompression sequence. Elara, Connor called, his voice tight with emotion. Be careful. She turned back to him, her transformed muzzle attempting something like a smile. Still me. Remember that. The airlock opened to the vacuum of space. Elara launched herself outward, her powerful transformed body propelling through the void with unexpected grace. True to her word, the vacuum seemed to have no immediate detrimental effect on her physiology. Connor watched in awe as she navigated toward the approaching security vessel. Using small bursts from the emergency propulsion unit, she grabbed before exiting. The security craft veered sharply, obviously not prepared for a direct external encounter. Taking advantage of the distraction, Connor piloted their small craft toward the Hermes, simultaneously opening an emergency communication channel. Hermes research vessel, this is Dr. Connor Hayes from Artemis Lunar Station. Requesting emergency asylum and scientific assistance, code Echo 79, researcher in distress. There was a long pause before a cautious female voice responded. Dr. Hayes, this is the Hermes. Our sensors show you're piloting an unauthorized emergency vehicle with Milton Group identifiers. Please explain. Dr. Tuma, Connor recognized her voice with relief. We're fleeing Milton. They've conducted illegal genetic experimentation with extraterrestrial biological material. My fiancé, Dr. Elara Winters, was exposed against her will. We need your help before Milton's security forces recapture us. Another pause. Where is Dr. Winters now? Connor glanced out the viewport where Elara was creating spectacular chaos among the security vessels, her transformed body leaping from one craft to another, disabling external communication arrays and sensor equipment. She's providing our diversion, he said carefully. I see. Doctor, Tuma's tone suggested she was watching the same scene through the Hermes external cameras. Bring your craft to docking port C. Come alone. We'll need to assess the situation before granting asylum. Thank you, Connor breathed, but I won't come without Elara. Your companion doesn't appear to need a spacecraft, Dr. Hayes, Tuma observed dryly. We'll extend her an invitation separately. The Hermes was everything its reputation promised. Cutting-edge technology seamlessly integrated with practical research facilities. Under different circumstances, Connor would have been fascinated by the vessel's design and capabilities. Instead, he paced anxiously in a secure observation room, watching through a reinforced viewport as a team of scientists in hazmat suits examined Elara. Her transformed body lay on an examination platform, powerful limbs secured with magnetic restraints that she could likely break if she chose to. Yet she submitted to the examination with surprising docility. "Remarkable adaptation," Dr. Eleanor Tuma commented, reviewing data on a tablet beside Connor. She was older than he'd expected, late 60s perhaps, with close-cropped silver hair and the lean physiology of someone who'd spent most of her life in variable gravity environments. "The cellular integration is complete at both the gross physiological and genetic levels." "Can you reverse it?" Connor asked, the question that had consumed him since their escape. Tuma glanced at him, her expression carefully neutral. "That depends on what you mean by reverse. Return her completely to human form? Unlikely. The transformation appears to be a one-way process at the genetic level, but stabilize her current state, prevent further mutation. Possibly." She gestured to a holoscreen displaying Elara's cellular structure in real time. "The extraterrestrial cell, or rather, the ancient terrestrial cells, based on your account, are still active. They're continuing to optimize her physiology for survival, adapting to each new environment they encounter." "Which means she'll keep changing," the thought horrified Connor. "Unless we can establish an equilibrium point," Tuma confirmed, "something that satisfies the cell's adaptive imperative without allowing uncontrolled mutation." A scientist in the examination room approached Elara with a tissue sampling device. Her transformed body tensed, a low growl emerging from her throat. "Enough," Tuma said sharply into the room's communication system. "She's a patient, not a specimen. Remove the restraints and allow her to rest." The scientist looked uncertain but complied. As the magnetic restraints deactivated, Elara sat up slowly, her amber eyes finding Connor through the viewport. The connection between them remained palpable despite her transformation. "You're not treating her like a threat," Connor observed, turning to Tuma. "Should I?" The older woman raised an eyebrow. "She's maintained cognitive function and identity despite a complete physiological transformation. That suggests remarkable neural integration, a partnership with the ancient cells rather than subjugation by them." She set down her tablet. "Besides, if she wanted to harm us, those restraints wouldn't have stopped her." Through the speaker system, Elara's distorted voice came through. "Need to talk. Privately." Tuma nodded to the scientists who filed out of the examination room. Once they were gone, she activated a privacy shield over the viewport, a courtesy that surprised Connor. "She's still a person, Dr. Hayes," Tuma said, noting his expression. "Transformed, yes, but entitled to dignity." Connor entered the examination room alone, his heart racing as he approached Elara. Up close, her transformation was even more profound. And yet, paradoxically, he could see more of the woman he loved in her eyes, in the way she held herself. "Connor," she said, her voice stronger now, as though she were gaining better control of her transformed vocal structures. "The cells are communicating more clearly now." "What are they telling you?" he asked, taking a seat beside her examination platform. "Their purpose," she replied. "They were Earth's first intelligent predators, long before mammals evolved, highly adaptable, capable of reshaping themselves to dominate any environment." Her massive head tilted as if listening to an internal voice. "When the asteroid struck, ending their dominance, a few were ejected into space within the impact debris. Out where they've been waiting all this time," Connor concluded. "Preserved in the lunar regolith until we found them." "Not just waiting," Elara corrected. "Planning. These cells retain a collective intelligence, a shared purpose that has endured for 200 million years. They want to reclaim Earth, reshape its evolution once again with themselves at the apex." Connor felt a chill. "Using humans as their vehicles." Elara nodded, the movement unnaturally smooth with her new anatomy. "The lunar radiation activated them, accelerated their integration, but they need Earth's biosphere to truly thrive, to reproduce. Which is why we can't return to Earth, Connor said. But that doesn't solve our immediate problem. Milton knows you're here. They'll find a way to reclaim you, their successful prototype. Not just me. Elara's amber eyes held his. You too. Your compatibility, high enough. They'll transform you too. Create breeding pair. Honor, the clinical way she stated this horrific plan struck Connor like a physical blow. Then we need to find somewhere beyond their reach. Mars, perhaps, or one of the outer system research stations. No place far enough, as long as cells exist, Elara said grimly. Connor, there's only one solution. Her clawed hand gently touched his face. Must destroy the cells, all of them. Including those inside you, he realized, his voice breaking. She nodded. Complete cellular purge, radiation that targets their specific structure. That could kill you, Connor protested. We'll kill this body, she agreed, but might preserve enough of original DNA to regrow human form. Might? Connor stood abruptly. That's not good enough. There has to be another way. The door to the examination room slid open. Dr. Tuma entered, her expression grave. I'm afraid we have a more immediate problem, she said. Milton has filed an official claim with the Lunar Authority, accusing us of corporate theft and harboring fugitives. They've demanded our immediate return to the orbital transfer station. You're not going to comply, Connor said. It wasn't a question. Tuma's lips thinned. The Hermes operates under independent research authorization. We're not obligated to submit to Milton's demands. She hesitated. However, they've dispatched 3 security vessels to enforce their claim. They'll intercept us in approximately 6 hours. Before we can reach Earth orbit, Connor calculated. We're not going to Earth orbit, Tuma corrected. While you were talking, I consulted with my team. We've altered course for the L2 Lagrange point beyond the moon. There's a research outpost there where we can continue our work away from Milton's immediate reach. It won't be enough, Elara growled. Milton has resources throughout cislunar space. Perhaps, Tuma acknowledged, but it buys us time to understand your condition better and potentially find a solution that doesn't require sacrificing your life. Connor looked between them, hope and fear warring within him. You think there's a way to neutralize the ancient cells without killing Elara? I think assuming there's only one solution is rarely good science, Tuma replied. We have 6 hours before Milton's forces reach us. I suggest we use that time constructively. The 6 hours passed in a blur of intense scientific collaboration. Elara, despite her transformed state, proved an invaluable participant, her enhanced senses detecting cellular behaviors invisible to their instruments. Connor focused on analyzing the genetic integration patterns, searching for vulnerabilities in the ancient cell's reproductive cycle. Dr. Tuma's team worked with remarkable efficiency, their expertise in extraterrestrial biology providing insights Connor and Elara had lacked on the Artemis station. The cells use quantum entanglement for communication, one scientist explained, displaying a holographic model of the cellular network now permeating Elara's transformed body. That's how they maintain collective intelligence despite being physically separated. And how they survived 200 million years in dormancy, Connor added, the pieces falling into place. They're not just preserved, they're temporally linked to their past state, which means, Tuma concluded, they might be vulnerable to quantum disruption. A plan began to form, not to destroy the ancient cells, but to sever their collective intelligence, rendering them inert biological material rather than an actively evolving organism with its own agenda. The challenge was developing a quantum disruption field that would target the cell's specific entanglement frequency without harming Elara's human DNA. The mathematics were daunting, the practical application even more so. 5 minutes to intercept, the Hermes navigation officer announced over the shipwide comm system. Milton's security vessels are hailing us with final demands to surrender Dr. Winters and Dr. Hayes. In the makeshift laboratory they'd established, Connor looked up from his calculations. We need more time. Elara, who had been unusually quiet for the past hour, rose from her observation position. Her transformed body seemed to have undergone subtle additional changes, refinements rather than dramatic alterations, as though the ancient cells were perfecting their integration. "No more time," she said, her voice clearer than before, almost musical in its alien resonance. "Must implement now. Partial solution, better than none. The disruption field is only at 63% probability of success," Tuma objected. "We need at least 80% to justify the risk to your neural system." "No choice," Elara insisted. "If Milton recaptures us, all Earth at risk. The cells, gaining strength in this form, soon will resist any countermeasure." A warning klaxon sounded throughout the ship. "Milton vessels deploying boarding craft," the navigation officer reported tensely. "Intercept in 3 minutes." Connor made a decision. "Prepare the quantum disruption chamber," he ordered. "I'll finish the calibrations while Elara gets into position." As the team rushed to comply, Connor caught Alara's transformed hand in his. "This might not work," he said quietly. "It might make things worse." "Might also save me," she replied. "Save Earth." Her amber eyes held his. "Worth the risk." The quantum disruption chamber was a modified medical imaging unit, hastily reconfigured to generate the specific frequency pattern they'd calculated. Elara's massive transformed body barely fit within it, her white fur brushing against the chamber's interior surfaces. "Calibration complete," Connor announced, making a final adjustment to the control panel. "Initiating disruption field in 3, 2, boarding craft attached to airlocks 2 and 4. The navigation officer's tense voice interrupted. "Security breach imminent." "Uri, 1. Connor activated the disruption field. The chamber hummed with energy, bathing Elara's transformed body in rippling waves of quantum interference. Through the chamber's viewport, Connor watched anxiously for any sign that the treatment was working or harming her. For several agonizing moments, nothing appeared to happen. Then suddenly, Elara convulsed, her massive body arching in what appeared to be excruciating pain. "Elara!" Connor moved to abort the procedure, but Dr. Tuma caught his hand. "Wait," she said, pointing to the cellular monitoring display. "Look." On the screen, the ancient cells throughout Elara's body were changing, not dying but disconnecting from their collective network. The quantum entanglement that had maintained their shared intelligence for 200 million years was unraveling, leaving them as individual cellular units rather than a coordinated organism. "It's working," Connor breathed. A violent shudder ran through the ship as the boarding craft forced entry through the airlocks. Distant sounds of conflict echoed through the corridors. Milton's security forces engaging with the Hermia's crew. "We need to get her out," Tuma urged, checking the monitoring screens. "The disruption has reached critical threshold. Extending exposure could damage her human DNA as well." Connor deactivated the field and rushed to open the chamber. Inside, Elara lay motionless, her transformed body showing no sign of awareness. "Elara?" he called, heart in his throat as he gently touched her furred face. "Can you hear me?" Her amber eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with effort. "Connor," she whispered, her voice weaker but somehow more human despite her unchanged appearance. "The voice is gone." Silence in my head. First time since transformation. Relief flooded through him. The ancient cells? Still present, she managed, trying to sit up. But disconnected. No collective intelligence driving them. Just biological components now, without purpose. The laboratory door slid open with a violent hiss. Armed security personnel in Milton uniforms poured into the room, weapons raised. "Step away from the specimen," ordered a cold, familiar voice. Director Chambers entered behind the security team, her expression a mixture of triumph and scientific curiosity as she surveyed Elara's transformed body. "Fascinating," she said, approaching cautiously. "Further mutations since your escape. The adaptation process continues to refine itself." "Enim." "Not anymore," Connor said, positioning himself protectively beside Elara. "We've neutralized the ancient cell's collective intelligence. They're just ordinary biological material now." no different from any other cells in her body. Chambers raised an eyebrow. Is that so? She gestured to one of her security team, who approached with a handheld scanning device. Let's verify that claim, shall we? Dr. Tuma stepped forward. This is a scientific research vessel operating under independent authorization. You have no jurisdiction here, Director Chambers. I have 3 armed security vessels and a team of trained personnel who disagree, Chambers replied coldly. She turned her attention back to the scanner results. Interesting. The quantum entanglement patterns are indeed disrupted. Her eyes narrowed. But the cellular structure remains. The physical enhancements, the adaptive capabilities, all still present. Without the collective intelligence driving them, Connor insisted, the threat you were concerned about, the cell's evolutionary agenda, has been neutralized. Perhaps, Chambers conceded, but the military applications remain viable. Enhanced strength, environmental adaptation, accelerated healing, all tremendously valuable, with or without the cell's original purpose. She nodded to her security team. Prepare Dr. Winters for transport back to Artemis Station, and sedate Dr. Hayes. He'll be joining our next phase of testing. As the security personnel moved to comply, Elara rose to her full transformed height, an imposing figure of white fur and primal power. Despite the disruption of the ancient cell's collective intelligence, her physical capabilities remained intact. No, she growled, the sound reverberating through the laboratory. No more testing, no more specimens. Chambers took an involuntary step back, fear briefly flashing across her composed features. Restrain her, she ordered sharply. The security team hesitated, clearly intimidated by Elara's transformed presence. That moment of hesitation was all she needed. Moving with fluid grace, Elara disabled the nearest guards with precise strikes, not killing or seriously injuring them, but efficiently removing them from the conflict. Her transformed body moved as a perfect fusion of human intelligence and predatory capability, controlled entirely by her own will, rather than the ancient cell's agenda. Director Chambers reached for an emergency sidearm, but Connor intercepted her, wrestling the weapon away. Enough, he said firmly. Your research has caused enough harm. Within moments, the remaining security personnel were subdued. Elara stood in the center of the laboratory, breathing heavily, but fully in control of her transformed self. Dr. Tuma moved quickly to the laboratory's communication panel. Security breach contained in main laboratory, she reported. All personnel, implement emergency protocol, Echo 7. What are you doing? Chambers demanded, now restrained by 2 of the Hermes crew who had arrived as reinforcement. Ensuring the survival of this ship and its scientific mission, Tuma replied calmly. The emergency protocol activates our secondary propulsion system, taking us beyond your security vessel's range before they can respond. Through the laboratory viewport, the stars appeared to shift as the Hermes accelerated rapidly, its advanced engines pushing it away from the pursuing Milton vessels. You're making a grave mistake, Chambers warned. Milton Group has resources throughout the solar system. There's nowhere you can hide. We're not hiding, Elara said, her transformed features set with determination. We're going where you can't follow. 3 months later, Connor stood at a viewport in the L2 research outpost, watching the distant Earth hanging like a blue marble against the black void of space. The outpost, originally designed for deep space observation, had become their temporary home while they worked on the next phase of Elara's treatment. Behind him, Dr. Tuma and her team made final preparations for the procedure they hoped would restore at least some of Elara's human characteristics without sacrificing the benefits of her transformation. The targeted gene therapy is ready, Tuma announced, checking the final diagnostic results. We've identified the specific gene sequences controlling external morphology without disrupting the cellular enhancements that protect her. Connor turned from the viewport. And the neural integrity? The quantum disruption has held, another scientist confirmed. The ancient cells remain disconnected from their collective intelligence. They function now as ordinary biological components, following Elara's human genetic directions rather than their original programming. Elara entered the laboratory, her transformed body moving with the graceful confidence she had developed over months of adaptation. While still unmistakably non-human in appearance, There was an integration to her movement now, a harmony between her human consciousness and transformed physiology that suggested not a monster or a victim, but a new form of existence. "Ready?" Connor asked softly. She nodded, taking his hand in her massive, clawed one. "Ready for whatever comes. Human form or not, still me inside." The procedure took 8 hours, a delicate process of genetic reprogramming targeting only the external manifestations of her transformation while preserving the cellular enhancements that had become integral to her survival. When it was complete, Elara emerged not as the fully human woman she had once been, but as something in between her original form and the complete transformation. A graceful hybrid with subtle lupine features, white fur reduced to a fine, almost invisible layer over mostly human skin, and amber eyes that retained their slight glow, but with human expression and structure. "Beautiful," Connor whispered when he saw her, tears in his eyes. Elara examined her partially restored form with wonder. "Still changed," she observed, "but more balanced now. The perfect integration of both aspects of yourself," Dr. Tuma said, reviewing the final medical scans. "Human consciousness and identity with the evolutionary advantages the ancient cells provided." "What happens now?" Connor asked. "Milton still wants both the research and us, which is why you won't be returning to Earth or the Moon anytime soon," Tuma replied. She gestured to the viewport, where a massive vessel was approaching the research outpost, far larger than the Hermes, with the distinctive configuration of a deep space exploration craft. "The Odysseus," she explained, "Frontier Science Foundation's new research vessel, equipped for extended missions beyond the asteroid belt. They've approved my recommendation for a scientific mission to study extremophile adaptation in the outer system environments." "With us as both researchers and subjects," Elara surmised, her partially restored features forming a smile. Tuma nodded. "The perfect team to lead humanity's understanding of adaptive evolution as we expand into the solar system." She handed them official documentation. "Your new research commissions, should you choose to accept them." Connor looked at Elara, searching her still alien but increasingly familiar features. A fresh start, far from Milton's reach, but also far from Earth, from everything familiar. "We create new familiar," Elara said, taking his hand. Her voice, while still carrying an unusual resonance, had regained much of its human quality. "Together, the first of something new." Through the viewport, Earth continued its distant rotation, beautiful but increasingly remote from their new reality. Whatever they had been before, ordinary human scientists with ordinary human concerns, had been transformed as surely as Elara's body. "Besides," she added with a hint of her old humor, "the universe just got a lot more interesting when we learned Earth's first intelligent species has been waiting to be rediscovered for 200 million years." "Speaking of which," Connor said, turning to Dr. Tuma, "what happened with the original samples from the lunar regolith? The dormant ancient cells?" "Contained and secured," Tuma assured them. "After the incident at Artemis Station became public, the Lunar Authority implemented strict quarantine protocols for all extraterrestrial biological materials. Milton's research has been suspended pending international review." "Not destroyed, though," Elara noted with concern. "Humanity rarely destroys what it doesn't understand," Tuma said pragmatically. "But perhaps your research in the outer system will help us better understand how to safely coexist with such discoveries in the future." As they prepared for their new journey, Connor found himself staring at Elara's transformed features, still alien in many respects, yet increasingly the face he loved most in the universe. The boundary between human and other had blurred, not just for her, but in his perception of what humanity itself might become as it expanded beyond Earth. "Second thoughts?" Elara asked, catching his contemplative gaze. Connor shook his head, taking her hand, changed yet familiar in his. "No, just thinking about evolution, how it never really stops, just changes direction sometimes." "Speaking of direction," she said, gesturing toward the massive exploration vessel now docking with the research outpost, "ours seems to be outward, into the unknown." "Together," he affirmed. Her amber eyes, still glowing faintly with the legacy of her transformation, met his. The only way to face any evolution worth experiencing. Beyond the viewport, the stars beckoned, silent witnesses to a bond that had transcended biology, surviving a transformation neither of them could have imagined when they first set foot on the lunar surface. Whatever the future held in the outer reaches of the solar system, they would face it not as purely human, nor as something alien, but as pioneers of what humanity might yet become. The end.